It's been 2 weeks since Ruben Amorim was sacked as Manchester United head coach. When he was hired in November 2024, he was seen as an exciting young project coach, precisely the kind considered required for the job. But 14 months later, he was already gone. So, what actually happened to cause this ending? When Manchester United fired Erik ten Hag in October 2024, then sporting director Dan Ashworth initially recommended candidates with Premier League experience to replace him. The club's chief executive, Omar Barada, meanwhile, backed Ruben Amorim decisively. But then technical director and now director of football, Jason Wilcox, initially had reservations about picking a manager so wedded to a back three. From the outset, Amorim had told executives that he wanted to start at United with a back three, but that he'd add layers once players better understood his methods. Amorim was hired, while Ashworth left the club 2 months later. And Amorim perhaps sensed that he was Sir Jim Ratcliffe's appointment after a prolonged one-on-one interview with the United minority owner before he got the job. And he seemed in a position of strength when the club backed his decision to consign Marcus Rashford, Antony, Jadon Sancho and Alejandro Garnacho to what became known as the Bomb Squad. Some at United told The Athletic that they felt that this had reduced Garnacho's value by £15 million, and Amorim was later challenged on the topic of the decision by United's former chief executive David Gill at a meeting of the football board at Old Trafford. But the club felt they were backing their manager, and did so again when they accepted Amorim's wish to scrap a behind-the-scenes Amazon documentary. But as time went on, Amorim felt that power eroding. When it came to recruitment of a striker, his preference had been Premier League proven Ollie Watkins, but United's director of recruitment, Christopher Vavell, advocated for the younger Benjamin Sesko, who ultimately arrived. This wasn't seen as too big an issue, but the decision to recruit the younger, cheaper goalkeeper, Senne Lammens, over Amorim's preference for the more experienced Emi Martinez was more keenly felt. Amorim also felt that United hadn't given their all to sign Antoine Semenyo. In the summer of 2025, Semenyo went as far as dining with Amorim and Manchester United's director of football Jason Wilcox in London, only for United to switch targets to Mbeumo because they viewed Bournemouth's £70 million asking price for Semenyo as too high. And Mbeumo was projected as costing at most £55 million, although eventually Brentford did push the fee to £65 million plus £6 million in add-ons. Semenyo was disappointed that he'd been rejected for a player who ended up at the same valuation, and he seemed in no rush to answer United's call a second time around in January, before ultimately joining Manchester City instead. During the talks, Amorim had told Semenyo that he would play as a left winger in a 4-3-3, and separately, confusion about tactics became an issue of contention as his reign went on at United. Ratcliffe had opinions on how the team should play. He suggested earlier in the season using Mbeumo at wing-back and wanted United to switch to a back four. He was seen visibly angry at the sloppy manner in which United conceded an equaliser right before half-time in the 4-1 win away to Wolves. Now, the job of communicating this to Amorim fell to Wilcox, who, despite his preference for a 4-3-3 formation that had been so successful at Manchester City, where he'd previously been academy director, he'd actually been seen as one of Amorim's big allies. They would talk daily, including about formations, but until late in Amorim's reign, this didn't translate into direct advice. But as Ratcliffe's desire for change became clearer, it's felt that Wilcox increased his efforts to persuade Amorim to show more flexibility. Amorim did oblige to a degree by sending his team out in a predominantly 4-4-2 shape against Bournemouth on December the 15th, and then a clear 4-2-3-1 shape against Newcastle United on Boxing Day. But when he reverted to his 3-4-2-1 for the 1-1 draw with Wolves on December the 30th, the half-time substitution of Joshua Zirkzee, one of his few available senior attackers, concerned members of United's hierarchy. Their senior leadership team, including Barada and Wilcox, were seen leaving Old Trafford around 90 minutes after the final whistle, in a sign that prolonged conversations with Amorim were taking place. That set the scene for what sources described as a, quote, massive fallout between Wilcox and Amorim 3 days later. In their face-to-face meeting at United's Carrington training ground, Wilcox suggested to Amorim that the players were struggling to gain trust in his 3-4-2-1 system and had become confused over his vision. Amorim would train the team in a back four, only for a back three to be selected in games. They also sensed he lacked faith in them due to his selections and public statements. Amorim responded that the players needed to be changed. Wilcox said he wanted to work through the issues, evolving the squad over time, but sticking with Amorim. Amarim reacted by saying he wished to leave the club and would be calling his agent. And when he then selected his 3-4-2-1 system, featuring just 2 attackers against Leeds 2 days later, it appeared to those with knowledge of the situation that he was making it clear that if this was to be his last game, he would bow out his way. And of course it proved to be exactly that. The next morning, he was officially sacked as Manchester United manager. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League football story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football.